Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation where we make connections and explore the root causes of the ideas and events which shape our lives. My name is Luke. That's Mike over there. Today we're going to talk about the occult, Israeli ceasefires, and the Beatitudes.
Okay.
All right. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing all right.
Okay.
Raining like cats and dogs outside, but...
Thus is Oregon in the fall, right?
That's right.
All right. So quick question.
Yeah.
Will we ever... We're hearing about more and more people dying unexpectedly. Matthew Perry recently.
Yes.
Part of me always suspects that there's an involvement of the vaccine. You know, photos immediately came out of the suspicious type that he was a big promoter of the vaccine and claimed that he had it many times. It feels to me like unverifiable information. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like you could play that game with everybody who dies. Yeah. What do you think?
I mentioned to my wife several months ago, I said, you know what's going to happen? This is going to be an unfair development to the rest of the world, but it's their fault. And that is, I think the vaccine is causing deaths all over the world.
Yeah.
The statistics for unexplained deaths in the middle of life are super high in several countries.
Yeah.
Okay. The problem is, every time somebody dies, then it's going to be pointed at. That's the reason.
And it starts to feel like superstition.
It feels, that's right.
But part of the reason it does is because the established experts refuse to acknowledge it.
That's what I'm saying. It's their
fault. And it sort of stokes the feeling of it's all
when you make a conspiracy and people pick up on it, they may not say everything true.
Right.
But they're hitting at something.
Yeah.
But they've had 5 other things that aren't really true. But it's the fault of the people hiding what's true. Yeah. It is their fault. And so, when I saw the Matthew Perry death, the first thing I thought was unexplained, middle life. I knew he had his health problems. Nevertheless, you don't drown in your pool and your jacuzzi at 54.
Right.
And you know, well, anyway, there's speculations about what. And the truth is, you're right. No, we don't know. There's no way to know.
And I want to make it clear, we do know that there are a massive number of excess deaths. We know
that's exactly right.
That the effects of the vaccine are incredibly negative.
Yeah.
Not just the side effects, but actually in COVID. It has a negative efficacy, meaning you are more likely to be hospitalized now.
More likely to get it.
I remember in the beginning of all this when people were refusing the vaccine, such as myself, and they were saying, now the hospitals are filling up with the unvaccinated. Yeah. Well, now the only people getting hospitalized... I mean, I've repeatedly heard people talking about the vaccine saying, I got all the boosters, and I've had COVID 4 times. And you think, who's had COVID 4 times?
Yeah.
Only the vaccinated have.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
So to say we don't know Matthew Perry's situation,
that's right.
But that doesn't mean we don't know.
It's still a signpost.
The statistics are strong.
Yeah, that's right. It's a signpost that something is wrong here.
Yeah.
And until the people in charge admit it, the worldwide people are going to continue to see a problem and overestimate where it is, but not because they're wrong about the issue.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Being imprecise isn't the same as being wrong.
That's right. Exactly.
All right. Well, hey, if you're enjoying this episode and you want to hear us talk more about things like vaccinations, click subscribe, leave us a comment about what you think. What is your favorite conspiracy theory around COVID?
We really haven't talked a lot about vaccinations.
No, have we not?
We haven't.
It's a touchy
We've
subject.
Talked about COVID more frequently. But,
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think in the end, the vaccination, I don't know if this will ever be verified.
Yeah.
I think the deaths from vaccinations will meet or exceed whatever COVID deaths. Simply because the number of COVID deaths have been so overblown.
Yeah.
And they've admitted to it.
And the funny ones, like a guy drives in a motorcycle accident.
Yeah.
And because he had a strain, he didn't even feel sick, apparently. But because he had it, it goes down. It's a COVID death.
What's crazy to me is how many times officials will admit exactly that sort of thing, right? Died with COVID versus from COVID.
Yep.
But the narrative still won't change.
I know it.
And that's how intense. I mean, I'm coming to believe the word brainwashing is appropriate for the things like this
that.
official
I've
narrative.
been thinking about that phrase since you said it, and I've been thinking about, I got to work that into more of my vocabulary about talking about what's happening. I think that's true.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the attorney shows where there's a trial going on, and it's a little melodramatic from a real trial. Nevertheless, somebody says something, and the judge says, objection, the objection just says sustained. The jury is instructed to forget that. And somebody comments, but they won't.
No, they won't. That's right.
So you're right. It's overturned, but the storyline of COVID will survive.
Yeah. Well, hey, today's All Saints Day.
Yes.
And having just had Halloween, I don't know, did your kids celebrate Halloween as they grew up? What were your guys' Christian convictions around that?
We were not opposed to going out and doing trick or treat for candy.
We would do the dress up and all that. Yeah. But we never made a thing about, in fact, we made a clear distinction, and now my kids are teenagers. What is the darkness behind this, and what's getting celebrated?
Yeah.
Versus let's dress up and have fun and get candy.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the spirit of that, literally the spirit of that,
yeah.
NPR had a headline saying that occult practices are, quote, as trendy and as helpful as veganism and yoga.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about how popular, I mean, we do an outreach with middle schoolers, and I brought up the topic, not just that God exists, but that evil spirits exist and that people are pursuing them and seeking them, and sort of dabbled in the 10 Commandments of, it's not just worship God, it's don't worship other gods. And I think there was a time in evangelism or in conversations with non-Christians, you assume they didn't believe anything. Yeah. Whereas now, especially with younger kids, middle schoolers, high schoolers, I now assume that they've dabbled in some kind of occult. If not, they're familiar with it, their friends are doing it, they're seeing it on social media. And that changes the dynamic of...
So when you say that, what do you mean? When you say occult, that's what definition are you giving that?
So I would say...
dabbled with...
I would say they've dabbled in summoning spirits that are not from God, right?
Do you mean like at a party?
Sure.
With friends?
Yep, hanging out, sleepover.
It used to be a Ouija board, might not be a Ouija board now, but the same kind of...
There are little games that kids play. We'd have it out on the playground where they spin a pencil and they call out to a name of a spirit being, and then if the pencil moves, that meant something or whatever. All sorts of that sort of thing. And the Bible's very clear that you are giving permission for some of those evil spirits to pursue you, to torment you even when you do that. And it's not a safe world in the spirit realm.
Yeah.
When you do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I was playing with that idea and thinking about the seriousness of it, and then also listening to, I've listened to Joe Rogan for a long time, although I'm not a faithful listener. Listening to a couple other guys that I listen to who promote even psychedelic mushrooms as this ability to regain your mental health, right? One guy, Sean Ryan, who I think I've mentioned before, he's a veteran. He's been through a lot of combat and promotes to combat veterans who struggle with PTSD and other mental health issues to pursue these kind of psychedelic experiences as a way to find peace within, right? So when you're at war with yourself after you've been at war with the enemy in a physical realm, you can't escape the war within, right? When you're tormented and you're fighting intrusive thoughts and all that sort of thing. And so he had a lot of success with it, and you can't argue with it, right? It's like a testimony of a Christian almost, except it's not a Christian. It's these psychedelic experiences, which the Bible does talk about on the same terms as occult practices. And I think, I just saw a headline last week of a pilot who was on mushrooms.
Yeah, I saw
didn't sleep for 40 hours straight, and then went and tried to crash a plane deliberately, and is now charged with
Did your
attempted
camera just
murder.
Go off?
Oh, it did. It's frozen.
Frozen.
All right, so
you can fiddle or pretend that you're watching me and listening, interacting with me. Well, I have a couple of thoughts on that. Number one, I think the article is right that there's a growing interaction more than prior. And my first response would be to say, well, it's understandable in this regards. When you excise or cut out God as a part of the foundations of life, we'll call it that. And we're going to get back to, at least for me, we're going to get back to, now I'm gone, huh?
Oh, we'll get it. We'll keep going.
All right. We're going to get back to our issue that we differ on in regards to theism versus Christianity. So
politically, you mean?
Politically.
Yeah.
As that topic has come up in that realm, it comes up in this one too. I think if you theistically cut God out, I'm not saying that if you decide not to be a Christian, But when you go this additional level and theistically cut out God at the grounding of your life, the human heart hungers for meaning beyond the physical world, beyond what we touch and experience and see. And so people are going to look for some other, even the show for a while, I saw commercials, Demi Lovato, looking for ghosts.
Yeah.
Right? And the desire to have a spooky experience, the numinous, Kant would call it, to engage with the invisible realm, even Skinwalker Ranch.
That's right.
The secrets to it that I watched, the scientists, they're trying to provoke phenomena. They call it poking the hornet's nest. And they brought in some contemporary Native American Indians that had been in that area, grown up there, but they have a band in which they produce the sound of the Native American Indians, the drums, which in those earlier periods of history were calling to spirits.
Yeah.
They bring them on, they make the sound, and things started happening.
Right.
And as I'm watching it, I'm thinking, you guys are stupid.
You're
idiots.
dabbling in things you don't understand.
That is right.
For sure.
It is not just creatures. They wanted to keep saying interdimensional. And as I listened to them, at first I liked that they're going that direction. But then what I realize is they are meaning something entirely different than what I think about interdimensional. They think wormhole interdimensional, a species, a physical species from another place being able to come here. That's interdimensional. And I don't think that's what I would use for that.
So I did hear, I heard someone who is a Christian, as far as I can tell, who was talking about this, and he was arguing that Christians should stop using the word supernatural, because his argument is that what we say as spiritual beings, they have their own laws of physics that they follow. And so he uses that interdimensional.
That may be true, but we don't know what they are.
Right.
And so I disagree with that approach only because Scripture seems to lay out this distinction of nature and what is more than nature than what we can interact with, that there is more than.
So was he right that supernatural is not really present in the Scripture, that term, that word? I can't think of
I don't think that word is. That is
it would just refer to it as spiritual.
Word. Yes,
yeah.
And soul, and mind, and heart, and
but that
things above the earth and things below the earth.
Well, that's interesting too, right? And the heavens and the highest heavens.
That's right.
And how aliens say that they're from the heavens. What? And that we can equate that to some of these angelic beings.
Beni Elohim, the sons of God.
Yeah.
So,
what that makes me think, though, and I think what the Bible authors are observing, besides just their own revelations from God himself, is people take these psychedelic drugs, right? That the people have been doing that since forever. And then they speak to these beings. Yeah. And that's what's happening now.
Yeah. So my first thought is that it's when you cut God out, what else is there? Man cannot, to quote a scripture and twist it, cannot live on the material world alone.
Yeah.
They can't. So the second thought is, I think there's going to be a lot of Christians as the occult rises whose response patterns are going to be this: that's not real. That's not true. That's not the real God. And I think that's a mistake. I think far better to say, no, it is real. Yeah. The Bible acknowledges it is real and says, don't go there.
So have we as Christian leaders failed to give them language for what's occurring?
Absolutely and completely.
I mean, I've tried to dabble at it from the pulpit, but it always feels like I'm going out on a limb. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
And I think this is one of the shortcomings of churches whose emphasis has said, well, we're gospel-centered, therefore we don't get into these secondary, tertiary issues of the Bible. And it's like, well, what happens when the tertiary becomes primary in people's minds and what they're thinking about?
Yeah, Paul wouldn't have agreed with that. I think Paul is gospel-centered. You look any of the books, he always starts with the great element of truth of the gospel. Yeah. It's radical formation of your life. And then he always ends up, and it means this, and it should mean this, and it should mean that. In Ephesians, he's going to lay 3 whole chapters of what this gospel is and this mystery and this tremendous thing. And then he's going to go all over the place for families and lives and social issues and spiritual warfare in particular.
Yep.
So I think the other dilemma is that it is, there's a danger. So when you mentioned the Halloween earlier, I didn't know you were going to ask that. It caught me by surprise, because what we did, we had Christian families that did not like, they thought we should have, because we were a pretty conservative family, that we should have not done Halloween.
Right.
That any reasonable conservative, family should not do that. And the same ones also tried to say you shouldn't do Christmas because tree is a pagan roots and da 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 da.
Yeah.
And it's not that those things aren't true, historical components. It's just a difference of perspective into how the gospel. It touches on how you and I are butt heads. That's not the right phrase. You and I are grappling with an issue, and it really is, how does the gospel call us to respond in an unbelieving, pagan, corrupt world?
Yeah.
And there can be different ways to understand that.
For sure.
And so I would say that the occult dabbling is not the same thing as letting your kids wear a costume and go around on October 31st, which is what we did.
Yeah.
But we did not participate in the darkness of the night.
And the darkness has gotten darker. Can I just say that?
Yeah.
I was walking through Home Depot of all places, and they sell decorations for people's yards.
Yeah, it is
And
darker.
it's like scarecrows and pumpkins have now become 8-foot tall werewolves and
Yes,
skeletons
yeah.
and blood dripping. And
Yeah.
it's like, what is going on?
And so we actually directed our kids away from these supernatural sides of things, because we wanted to defang and take it out of that realm and make it just
But here's the trick, right? And maybe this is the problem that we created ourselves, is when we defang the supernatural, now we're facing a world where suddenly the supernatural has real fangs.
I mean, that's true.
And our kids sort of think, oh, it's just a joke. It's not real.
That's a good point. That's a fair point.
I mean, I'm as guilty as you.
Yeah.
That
So
thought.
at some point it may become, when our kids were little in the 90s and early 2000s, that was less of an issue. But if it were today, perhaps we would say, we can do something here, but let's sit down and talk about what the night's about and what's real in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I only had one son dress up this year, and so I persuaded him to dress up as a crusader.
Yeah.
A crusader knight. I felt that was
One
fitting.
other thought about your mushrooms thing is, what it reminds me of is the element of the 60s where drug use was an avenue of escaping. Something is broken in the world, the hippie culture says.
Yeah.
And they don't know where to turn. They don't believe their parents are not going to turn to the traditions that were a part of our nation. And they turned to drugs, and they found spirits also.
Yeah.
And it was not always pleasant. And the fact of the matter is it wore itself out. It's not sustainable.
Well, part of what's going on is you hunger to be part of something bigger than yourself, and spirits provide that.
Yeah,
even
that's
when
right.
even when it's a lie.
That's right.
You
That's
feel
right.
connected to a larger universe.
That's right.
You also get to negotiate with them, and you don't get to negotiate with God. You have to come and surrender when you come to Jesus. And so people that aren't ready to surrender but still long for spiritual connection,
Yes, that's a good point.
drugs is a nice avenue for that.
Yeah. There's
What
a reason they don't choose Jesus.
What I think and am actually pursuing is we should be offering more and better healing of mental illness, of PTSD, of addiction than any psychedelic experience offers. Because if Christ sets you free, you're free indeed. And so I think there's a lost ministry there as far as setting people free from the effects of generational sin, of addictive spiritual tormenting and compulsive behaviors. So that's what I'm interested in finding out more of.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk a little politics here. Israel, people calling for Israel to ceasefire.
Yes.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So there are people saying that that's what should happen. Here, I don't want to offer thoughts. I want to ask a question.
Okay.
What I think is a provocative question. I think I know where I would go on the question, but I want to ask it anyway. In the line of that thing of they should cease fire, there's political positions that are being represented. So forget all that for a second. Let's just do the verses we kind of talked about last week. You have heard it said, Jesus says, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Okay.
Okay, now Israel, they're not Jesus followers. They don't think he's the Messiah, the Israelis of today.
Yeah.
So we're going to take that part out, but let's take them back to the part they are committed to, the Old Testament law, the Torah.
Which, by the way, an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth is not saying you can get revenge equal to the harm you received, but rather that punishments given out by the government should be proportional to the crime, right? So in other words, an eye for an eye is the government's punishment that you receive when you pluck someone's eye out or when you knock their tooth out.
When you say government, are you talking Old Testament Israel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, the covenantal state, which is king, priest, prophet.
But part of what I'm saying is we've interpreted that, or it's been, I think, promoted in quotations like an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, that the Bible somehow is giving permission in the Old Testament to seek revenge. When it's not, it's saying that the community's obligation is to establish justice so that people don't have to go and seek revenge.
Yes, it is a matter of justice. Its emphasis is not revenge. It's also, on the matter of justice, it says how far, and it also says how far not.
Right.
So both those components into it. So what my question is this, and you're right, it is within the confines of Israel's covenantal structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what I interpret you meaning when you say the word government, because it's not government as we think of it today, but government under their terms. But my question is, so the count, 1,400 Israelis on this, this period, slain by Hamas. But the last numbers I see, and these are not Palestinian numbers, but we don't know exactly what's true. But 8,400 is the death number in Gaza. And so the question I want to ask is this. Go ahead.
Can we just say from the beginning that there's no numbers in a war that are actually reliable? Especially when they claim 500 people die in a hospital bombing that turns out to be a parking lot burned.
I agree with that. And even if you remember 9/11, it took a long time to get to the number.
Yeah.
The first numbers were not right. And it's okay to not be right.
Yeah.
But the point is that if it hasn't already, it more than likely soon will be. So let's just say this. Israel's determination is to eradicate Hamas. This is it.
And
so it
in all likelihood, take
again.
Gaza back, right?
We don't know that yet, what that's going to mean.
I can't see
That's
any other
not
way.
what they're saying. They're saying they're going to leave it Palestinian, but they're going to have enforcement parameters so that won't become this hotbed of tunneling underneath and being able to surprise Israel again.
Right.
My question is, how do they see this in accordance, or are they just throwing away their own Torah?
Oh, because they've gone beyond an eye for an eye.
They have exceeded it significantly, and they probably are still going to exceed it.
Yeah.
So is that, do they care? That's one question. Should they care? I guess I'm just asking the question. I think I have I know how I'd answer, but I'm curious as how you would.
I mean, I have an instinctive answer. It certainly isn't a second thought at this point.
Yeah.
And that is that having heard the stories and the pictures of, piles of the bodies of the elderly, of babies burned, of women raped in sight of their children dying, I'm content that every Hamas person can die.
In that sense, you could make the argument that it's not equality is not a numbers issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I heard somebody talking about, and it shocked me at first, and then I thought, I don't know how to deny it, which is in the Old Testament, there were times when God says, you kill them all. You go in and you kill every one of them.
So that's where I was going to go, that the eye for the eye and tooth for tooth is a principle internal to Israel's functioning together.
Right.
Not necessarily her adversaries seeking her destruction.
And when you have kids, they bring their kids to battle for two reasons. One, so that they grow up with a hunger to kill Jews. But two, when they die in the battle, they can carry their bodies out into the street and say, look what Israel did.
Yeah. So in that vein, then I think the ceasefire calls are pretending an avenue of justice that is applicable in one realm, and they're taking it into another realm.
Right.
So that I do think it's just for those in the leadership of Israel, if they determine, it's their decisions, but if they determine this is an enemy we want to take out, they're not bound by this eye for eye, tooth for tooth, is my thought.
Right. And I'm not promoting annihilation battle strategy.
I know.
just
I
saying,
hear you exactly.
for the first time ever, I see it. I see why.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a there's a famous, I don't know if it's famous, there's a funny, John Mulvaney is a stand-up comedian. And he's telling a joke of how as a kid he growing up, he never understood why anyone would kill another human. Like, why would you commit murder?
Yeah.
Like, I get mad, but come on.
Yeah.
He says, and then I got cheated on. And I was like, oh, okay.
Here's these passions.
Now I see why, right? That it's suddenly real in a way that it wasn't before.
Yep. Yeah. Now, do you think, last question on this one, do you think there's any similarity to us dropping a bomb on Japan, World War II?
Yeah, I mean, it's
So
a similar.
in other words, we say we're not going to
issue.
keep fighting in the trenches. We've got a method that's drastic, and we'll end it.
It's better to end it
So we're going to
than
take
to just
it and
string
end
it out for decades.
Yeah. I was thinking
other
about that
time
too.
is-
Even though
it's
our
a-
world today hates that happened, the
It's
left.
a very modern concept, the idea of like, oh, we're not going to kill civilians, right? Even in World War
true.
II, you just bomb the crap out of the cities.
Mm-hmm.
You just destroy them until they say we give up. And that's the goal. I mean, that's why they had to empty London of the children, right?
Yeah.
And nobody thought that was a war crime at the time.
Yeah.
But now with such precision armaments, I remember first Gulf War, and we'd see coming back these videos of the bomb going right to the spot, and you're like, I can't imagine it. And now that's normal.
Yeah.
So how do you think this is going to impact, nations around it? And I even I'm seeing so many, there was 100,000 some odd protesters in the streets of London calling for the death of Israel, kill the Jews. It's sort of spilling out into the left is just sort of, they don't know what to do. It feels like they're getting ripped in two.
What do you think of this statement? This is actually causing more ripples of uncertainty in the world than Russia invading Ukraine. Do you think that's...
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Even though in a sense it's not as large in a sense, but it is causing more consternation on multiple fronts.
It feels to me like there were suddenly, just under the surface, and I didn't know, all this seething hatred for Israel that it suddenly is bubbling up.
So we have all this pro-Hamas and Palestinian, this, that, but I don't know if you saw recently, I just saw it actually this morning, from last night in Paris, all these Jewish homes had a Star of David stenciled on them.
Like they were getting marked.
They're getting marked, and obviously it's a reminiscence of the Nazism that marked with a yellow star.
Right.
The homes, that whole thing, we think about an individual walking around with a star, but what we forget is that was not what happened at first.
That's not how it started.
It started with homes, and it started with some rational da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But this was a pathway of destruction, and we're seeing that. We see the demonstrations, but now this there probably hasn't been anything more chilling that I've seen, even over the demonstrations that have been in America and in Europe. But the marking the homes with stars is like there is no more overt identification with destruction than those stars.
Yeah. Well, I was telling someone the other day, thankfully, that in America, the poor immigrants to America are by and large Catholic, right? People coming here for opportunity, people trying to escape poverty and oppression. It's generally Central and South America.
Yeah.
In Europe, it's the Middle East.
Yeah.
So you're importing this huge population in some cases, right? In Germany and in England and others, of people who hate Israel.
Yeah. And we're
Paris.
asking the same questions ourselves now. People are more and more saying, what has come across our borders? And what are we exposed to? What could be a surprise for us?
Well, the numbers are there. I was listening to a CIA person this week on a podcast saying, we've tracked terrorists coming across our border. So that's just the ones we know of.
Yeah, that's right.
Imagine the ones we don't. And and so it's a deliberate strategy on their part.
Yeah.
Them meaning the enemies of the U.S.
One of the things that has happened as well, I know we talked about it, sometimes it feels weird. Have you heard, as if we've just brought it up, but we mentioned it earlier amongst ourselves, but Yemen declared war on Israel. And I think this is just another thing like, wow, that's kind of weird. I mean, they didn't just support, they made a declaration as a state.
Now, Yemen has been in a civil war for years. Is that correct?
I don't know.
I remember back through Obama that it was like it was all kinds of turmoil there.
But it's like there's a bandwagon.
Or
There's
as if there
something to
are
join.
spiritual beings in control of state affairs that have a seething hatred for those whose
Let's
name
bring
is
in
identified
another
with
piece
God.
here. I don't know what struck me, and then I want to tie them together. But what has struck me a couple days ago, and for a couple times, was that the U.S. bombed some Iranian sites in Syria.
Yeah.
So 2 countries away, Iran backing, but then in Syria, and I had a strange response to that. No, that's not. It was a yellow flag. Maybe it was a red flag even. And that something's not right here. Why did we just bomb, and why did it make the news? What's really happening here on second thought? And I there's a couple options. One, I don't doubt that we're in little firefights all over the world all the time. Our military people, and it never makes the radar or the news or anything, right?
Yeah.
That happens. So is this one of them? And it just because of the nature of it made the news as a result? Or is it escalation from behind the scenes? What does Obama, who I personally think is behind 51% of Biden administration,
51. At least.
51%, did he want us to attack Syrian? Is it provocative? Is it trying to make it more chaos?
Interesting.
Because that's unusual for us to actually have military attack that's pronounced and not kept off the pages and let be a firefight under the radar. And they're pretending like the incidents are because there was some attacking of us with some little drone stuff.
Okay, but
and that
Syria's
we just
been in a civil war as well since Obama, right? That's still ongoing. We just don't hear about it. And so I just wonder, how many places are we bombing all the time?
Well, I agree. I think we are bombing
Which is
lots
a
of
huge
places
problem,
like that.
because we're fomenting all
But
of the
they're
chaos
not
that we're now
making
reaping.
the radar of being shown to the American people.
Right.
So why is this one? And why right now?
Well, if you dump 1,000 U.S. journalists into Israel, you're going to get some headlines when U.S. gets involved in things.
Maybe that's just as simple as this. There's more attention being paid to it.
Right.
That's possible.
Well, and every single thing that maybe was normal a year ago now feels like an escalation as part of what's going on in Israel.
It's almost like the Matthew Perry thing, right? Something's going on, but you don't know what. And so you see 10 things, maybe only 7 are real, but 3 are false, but you have no way to know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I think about the options with Aaron. But I just think that it is, there's a little bit of a powder keg here. And there are bad actors. And I'm going to go ahead and say what I think. Principal among the bad actors is Mr. Obama, President Obama.
Yeah.
In wanting to create chaos. And if there is a way to provoke, I think the borders are a result of he's taking the Biden administration and its inability to be an articulate individual who runs his own life.
Right.
Jill can hardly even run his own life. It's an opportunity to open up the border for massive invasion. And I think this is another opportunity for, I'm concerned about that personally.
Well, I think even he knows it, or at least he's making claims that they're trying to shut the border down. The hard part for Democrats, in my view, is that bringing people across the border is just bringing more voters. Because if you can bring 1 million people per year in who are dependent on some kind of welfare system, they're going to vote for Democrats who promise an endless supply.
So another point of all this is the conflict that this is creating, and the border is a conflict that's being created too. So Abbott and DeSantis both sending people, but Abbott in particular of Texas, sending people to other states, New York, right? And New York is complaining loudly. They can't handle this.
And they're getting a fraction of what Texas deals with.
That's exactly my point. And they are complaining, and I think their complaints are real and justified.
Yeah.
And they're saying something got to change. And these are Democrats saying this. It's causing this internal disruption inside Democrats.
Right.
But Israel is too, with the progressives chanting for Hamas and the old line liberals saying, you guys are nuts, man. What's going on?
Right.
This is crazy. You want to raise up anti-Semitism again.
Okay, so to me, this also gives an opportunity for DeSantis to come in successfully. in the sense that he's handled the issue very well. He sent, as we've talked about, planes to get over and help U.S. people.
He's been an executive.
He also has strong connections, being a governor of Florida, with the Jewish community in the U.S. because there's tons of...
He's addressed them directly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did see they're going to try to get all the presidential candidates to address the Jewish coalition. But this gets back to the question I asked you a couple times ago, episode, and I heard you answer, and I believed your answer. I talked to somebody else, and they agreed with your answer, but I just don't know. I don't feel like it's all the way. Why are Jewish people Democrats? And your answer was they live in cities. And I accept that. But it just doesn't feel like it really answers all of it.
There's more. There is more
something
to
more.
it as well. I've heard multiple people talk about this because there's a lot of media coming out about what's the deal with Judaism, right? But one of the things I've heard numerous times is that in Judaism, as we see it today, you don't go to heaven because you believe in God. You go to heaven because you're a good person. Democrats sell that as their line. If you're a good person, you're a Democrat. If you want capitalism, competitive advantage, and who wins and the weak,
especially in the victim arena of good person.
You're taking care of the weak and the poor.
There is no literal victim status than Jews, especially in our last 75 years of history.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe there's something. Yeah, that feels more like I think there's some spiritual component to it, and I don't know. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe.
Well, and I just think of it as a sales line. Mm-hmm. The Democrats' pitch is, if you're a good person, you vote for us. We're the kind people, right? And we have fun, and those guys go to country clubs and talk about how they're better than everyone else.
Okay, but this brings up another point of contention, and I don't know why it's not reflected in the Jewish community's response. So the Jewish community, Netanyahu in particular, but Jews around the world, we got to fight back.
Right.
Okay?
Well, Jews in Israel are not liberal. They're intensely conservative because they have to be. I mean, if you say the defining characteristic of a conservative is they want borders around things, whether it's countries or marriage,
sure,
right,
sure,
or the definition of sex, like we're about defining and categorizing and saying this is this and
making
that's that.
Clear.
Well, that's Israel's whole existence.
Okay, so why aren't the Jews in New York connected to their brothers and sisters in Israel in that spirit? Especially under the attack like this. Why doesn't it drive them from the Democratic Party now?
I think on the surface, the Democrat Party would say, and Joe Biden is saying, we support Israel. And so as long as that can be happening, you get permission to be liberal by living in peace and safety. When things are hard, you don't have that privilege anymore, that extravagance.
That's true. He's come out and said that, which the party... the administration's behavior and the Obama force behind it, that is not what they think.
But that's why the liberals are getting torn apart in the sense that the BLM wing, which very much...
they're willing to say the other line.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of, like the squad in the House are saying some of these same anti-Semitic tropes. You know, and have been for years. But now suddenly it matters because people are dying.
I think one of the things this also has the ability to bring into contrast and relief is the nature of evil. And I think it's another line drawn in the sand. You can either say we don't really believe in evil, we believe in, or you could say no, there is real evil. When is it just to say no, we're going to destroy you? For our nation to say that you're an enemy,
right?
And I think that's taking place right now, and I think it is. The shock of it has given space for it. And I think that would actually be a good thing.
Right.
And what's interesting about that is that the Middle East, it's not just the Jewish people that are acting that way right now, but the Arab nations themselves have no problem saying we're going to exterminate what's evil. Now, we don't always agree with their definition. Right. They think anyone not following Allah. Technically, that would be the jihad portion of them, say it's our call to terminate you.
Well, but that's where the Western nations have gone astray by, even with the new atheism, where Christians have tried to placate new atheism by saying, no, we're not like that. We're not fundamentalists, we're the good kind of religious. But the differences are not who's religious and who's not, or how fervent. The fervent and the, rational, The difference is whose law is actually just.
Yes, that's right.
That's really the question, I think.
That's right, yeah. And it ends up getting back to why is the law just? I was asking a group of friends this morning, why does Islam not create places of prosperity for the masses of their people?
In other words, why do the refugees from Muslim countries all want to go to Europe?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And because shouldn't they say that from Ishmael on, they parted ways with Abraham in a sense, right?
Yeah, but they say that in the 7th century AD.
I understand, but shouldn't they have a root back to God created the world, man is created in the image of God in the value, in the same way that Christians have, but they don't.
Right.
Christianity, it doesn't always do this, but in general, because of its view of the dignity of people, it unleashes them to pursue life and prosper.
Yeah.
But Islam does not.
Well, I mean, we've talked about this before. That's the difference between Israel as a word and Islam as a word. Because the word Islam means to submit.
Yes. That's right.
Israel means to wrestle with God.
Yes, that's right.
And
that's
we've been given permission to wrestle this thing out.
Yes.
What is the truth? And
by God.
By God.
Yeah, that's
Himself.
right.
In fact, he commends us. He names his people, those who wrestle, right?
That's a good point.
And so when your life is all about submission, I mean, you know this as a dad, as a husband, if you become obsessed with submitting, you're going to make a hostile home. That's what's going to come.
Yeah, you end up killing.
Right. And your kids won't want to be in that home when they grow up.
Yeah. I was thinking of it in terms of what happens is that when you flesh out the Abraham story through Jacob and eventually to Jesus, you get a shining light that comes, and his light shines all the way back to the Moses story of creation. And we see it more clearly of this liberty, what this light means. And the Muslim faith does not have the shining light of Jesus. They believe he's a prophet, but they don't think he's a controlling definition of what life is, and it doesn't shine back.
Yeah, they still believe
readjust.
Muhammad is the greatest man who
That's
ever
right.
lived. Yeah,
That's right.
I've been doing a little more reading about that in the last couple of weeks and listening to lectures on the history of Islam. It's fascinating, and it's not all that, that you cracked up
Muhammad
to
is
be.
the pinnacle of the prophets. From Moses
but
through
it's fascinating
Jesus to,
because even within the Hadith, it speaks of Muhammad and his life where he attempted suicide at times after having his initial visions of the angel. He didn't, the angel that, or the being who spoke to him, he didn't think it was Gabriel until a Christian said, oh, that was an angel. So even his initial visions and revelations, so to speak, weren't clear to him. And you know, to contrast that even with an Old Testament biblical prophet, let alone with Christ himself.
Yeah.
The comparisons are pretty. I mean, I'll get into it more as I read more.
Yeah. All right, reflections on Israel ongoing.
I know. And yeah, well, I'm sure we'll be back to it. Well, hey, I had a couple thoughts on communism and how we talk about that. But before we do, I just wanted to say that this podcast is part of the Trinity School. The Trinity School is a culture building enterprise that includes education, influence, industry, and the arts. And if you want to support what's going on at the Trinity School or just learn more about it, about how we're trying to build communities that honor Christ, you can donate to our efforts by going to gracestaten.com/Trinity School. Okay, so I listen to Scott Adams on occasion. He is the Dilbert comic strip who famously got canceled. I mean, he's been canceled several times, but several months ago, they canceled all of Dilbert. Like, he's gone out of every publication because he said some inflammatory things about the black community based on a survey that the majority of black folks disagree with the statement, it's okay to be white. And it became a huge thing. Okay, but I don't want to talk about that necessarily, but rather that Scott Adams was talking about when conservatives talk about Marxism, right? Critical race theory or socialism or other things, it doesn't work as an influencing tool. It's not persuasive, which is his kind of center.
Anymore. Used to, but not now.
And for the simple reason that it's too intellectual. People don't know what Marxism is exactly, right? And they certainly don't associate it any longer with like the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Because if you asked most people under 30, can you tell me what happened in the Soviet Union? They don't really know.
Yeah.
And so instead they say, oh, like socialism, like socialized medicine, like they have in Canada. I like Canada. They're nice.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't persuade. And he was promoting this idea of the brainwashing as the way to talk about it.
Yeah.
I was thinking more about what is communism? How would you define it? And my take was communism is total control, first of all, which I think everybody can have a visceral reaction to. The government gets total control, but then who do they give it to, right? In the worst forms of capitalism, they give total control to the rich. But in socialism or communism, they give the total control to the people who fail at everything, right? And I think we saw this, the beginnings of it under COVID. That it was the most useless people who were the most obsessed with masks. Like suddenly they had both a moral and a tangible imperative to take command of every social setting to make sure that you followed the rules. And the most, I mean, it's not the most unsuccessful, but I saw it a lot. A lot of people who struggle to find footing in a real practical way in their lives now suddenly found this commanding authority, especially over like their own parents, right? Or their relatives gathering for Christmas, that no, we will follow these rules. I think that's communism at its heart. The people who can't make it in a competitive world, in a free market of ideas or a free market literally of financial exchange, now they get in charge of all the rules because they're victims of the system that's against them.
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts are on how I'm phrasing that. Does it seem?
I think it's right. I think it's right on. And I do even think that COVID was a season in which that had a burst of energy.
Yeah.
And it was something deeply wrong. I wonder if it even explains something I've not been able to answer. I've noticed there is, it's got to be less than 10%, maybe even less than 5%, but there are regular people go to the grocery store and they have masks.
It's still happening. Yeah.
And I think to myself, immediately when I see them, and I don't know how to judge these feelings, but I think, I don't trust you. I don't like you. I don't want to see you. I don't want to be around you. If you're a person wearing a mask,
I just feel bad. Like, oh man, you're really trapped.
Well, I feel that too, but that's down the road. Right down the road.
That's the second, not the first.
It
thought.
is. It's actually when I chastise myself just a smidgen.
Yeah.
And try to think what might be going on and think a little more like Jesus, but I think it makes me angry first.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it maybe even it touches on what you're saying. It's a grasp for a form of power that is now gone. I hadn't thought about it in terms of power like that, but I did think about it all along as a form of righteousness. Mm-hmm. And there's that wokeness is, and this was attached to wokeness, that is a form of saying, I am righteous. And people would say to me, I do this because I'm a Christian. I got the COVID shot because I'm a Christian. I thought it was my Christian duty to do that. The implication they're trying to saddle me with is that if you don't agree with this, you're failing in your Christian duty. Right. And I had many people who I would say had a close relationship, in a sense, close proximity, say those things to me.
Right.
And not just distant strangers, right? And I just don't buy it.
There's more and more people now. I mean, it's been trickling in, but this week on Bill Maher had a couple guys on, Cuomo, one of them, talking about how they just did their best and they didn't understand, right, when they were sending the elderly back to these homes to die and spread COVID among.
That's called manslaughter. When you don't understand, you did it on accident.
Right. But there was a guy who was on a local school board or his private school's board, I think his kid's private school, saying, I wish we'd done it different, but we just didn't know any better. And it's like they're asking, and they're asking for forgiveness.
I know.
But part of, I was struggling to say, am I wrong for refusing it? Because I refuse, right? Immediately, my first impulse is like, no, screw you, right? But then I had to stop and think, okay, well, is there something missing from their apology, or am I just being sinful?
That's what I think
it is. The thing I found that's missing is they're not saying, you were right.
Yes, that's right.
They won't say that. They'll say they were wrong.
Yeah.
But to all the people who said, no, we did have the information and you refused to listen.
It's a qualified not wrong. It's a wrong I didn't understand. I didn't see it clearly.
They're not saying that. They're saying, I couldn't have seen it clearly.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Which means...
It's the blindness wrong rather than I refused to hear what you were saying.
And I refused to look at the data that you were bringing out.
That's right. And I was doing it anyway because of power. I made choices based on power.
Right.
And they're not saying, so I agree, it should not be, it is not, we wouldn't allow that kind of apology to reconcile a relationship when it's over a significant matter, right?
Yeah, I think like if a pastor had committed some kind of corrupt act of infidelity or financial impropriety, and they said, I just didn't know any better, but I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You don't
yeah,
keep them as a
that's right.
pastor.
Now, I'll tell you one that I thought was a keepable, and this is to illustrate your point. This is during the Me Too movement stuff, and Weinstein, when he was in trial, Tarantino, the director, comes out and says, I need to apologize publicly. I heard and knew I didn't know it was this bad,
But everybody
I
heard,
heard
yeah.
and knew some stuff, and I didn't do anything.
Right.
And that was wrong of me. I should have. And I thought, you know what? This sounds and feels sincere.
Yeah, it's not conditioned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And he did say, I didn't know as much as is being shown now, but I knew enough,
Yeah, right.
and I should have, and I was
Could've.
wrong.
And the fact is, even those who are in positions of power during COVID, it's very similar, right? Why didn't someone like Tarantino speak up? Because there's a cost.
Yeah, that's
Harvey
right.
Weinstein was powerful in Hollywood.
That's right. That's right.
He makes the money. He decides who's famous. Like, he had a lot of
right.
sway. Yeah. In fact, I think the same was true under COVID.
Carino spoke up, and she basically lost her career.
Who did?
Gina Carino, the
Carano.
Carano.
Gina Carano. Yeah.
I mean, she
The
did
Mandalorian.
speak up. She had the courage to, and yes, there was a cost.
And
There she paid it.
And kudos to Daily Wire for picking her up and using her.
Yeah, I agree.
And they're doing a lot. You know, we talk about building culture. I don't agree with a lot of how Ben Shapiro constructs conservatism, but they're doing something to build culture. They just announced a whole cartoon channel for kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
So
they're
how
doing
do
good
you
work.
how do you leverage? Do you just start saying mind control,
Brainwashing.
brainwashing? You just start using it more in place of Marxism. This
Yeah.
is brainwashing, and you just explain the, you should reward those who work hard on merit, not those who have an in with the boss. That's brainwashing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just start substituting.
Well, what part of what my argumentation in the past has been is this is bad because it's Marxist, thinking everyone would nod and be like, "Oh, that's a good point."
right.
And it's
It
just
doesn't.
not. It's not a shared common moral stand anymore.
Yeah.
So, but everybody, I think, at this point says, "Oh, yeah, we don't want to be brainwashed."
Well, and I think there's a reason that it's not a shared thing besides its complexity, and that is they've made successful inroads in changing the content of beliefs so that when they hear what you and I would say, that's a Marxist approach. Do you understand that? They don't understand it. They actually agree with it.
Yeah, that's right.
They have been persuaded and didn't even know it.
I heard a pretty cool story. I think it was a journalist.
E.g., they've been brainwashed.
They've been brainwashed. That's right. Yeah, and if you can define brainwashing as, I stopped thinking for myself.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't check. I just said,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay," and you take things as
Yeah.
they're fed to you.
Yeah.
I heard a great story. I think it was a journalist. He was at a gay pride parade, and he came across a man wearing a Che Guevara shirt. And instead of normally you would scoff or be shocked, but move on. Because Che Guevara is well known for calling for executions publicly and doing so of gays.
Yeah.
So he instead, and I think this is what the Bible's talking about when it says love your neighbor as yourself, he approached him. He said, "Hey, do you know what Che Guevara is about?" And he pulled up on his phone. This is what he said about gay people. And the guy was shocked. And then he pulled out his own phone. He looked it up himself and confirmed it. And then he said, "I can't believe it." And he went to his car. He took off the Che Guevara shirt and he left.
Interesting.
I think, holy cow. We just assume you can't win, right? But part of the reason, and this is my own thing too, is you're not having the impact on Facebook debates or in other places as you will in person, talking to a real person.
Yeah, face to face. That's totally true. It reminds me when you said it that way, there is a reason the feeling of not winning comes, and that is because of Romans 1, it says, everyone suppresses the truth in unrighteousness.
Yeah.
So what that ends up meaning is for every story like the one you just said, which is good, there is another story when the person finds out and they don't want to care. They don't want to be consistent with what is true.
Right.
They want to live a certain way.
Yeah.
And they're willing to sacrifice what's true in order to do that. So
I heard one of my Facebook memories from way back when I lived in Eugene popped up recently, and it was this little story of a teacher saying to a little girl, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And her liberal parents looking on approvingly, and she says, "I want to be president." And the teacher says, "Oh, what would you do if you were president?" She says, "Oh, we'd give money to the poor." And he says, oh, well, why don't we go down and we'll do some yard work? You can work at my house. I'll pay you.
Yeah.
And then you can give your own money to the poor. I mean, there's a homeless guy down on the street. And she says, oh, I don't want to do that. And he says, why not? Because the homeless man can work. And he says, welcome to the Republican Party. And the parents are super mad, right?
Yeah.
What I think now, though, right, years later is that's not welcome to the Republican Party. Because the Republican Party doesn't stand for that. It says that in the same way that the Marxists don't stand for gay rights.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They stand for what I would say is welcome to the free market.
Yeah.
The Republicans are, let's maintain power as it has been as long as we can.
And that's the thing that I think from a biblical perspective, what we fight with is having to do two things according to Scripture. One, recognize that the world is broken and it's not an issue of rationality. It's truth suppression for the sake of wanting to do unrighteous things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the way God works is he works by persuading the mind of an individual. There are supernatural components to that persuasion, I believe, but it is always in the presence of reasons and reasoning.
Yeah.
And so he calls us to speak to individuals in a setting that, to all appearances, it will not be successful.
Right.
But you never know. Maybe God will make what you say have life, even to the lowest degree of the friend somebody shares with the man. Do you know what Che Gavez, what he really...
Che Guevara, yeah.
Yeah, what he really supported?
Right.
No, and there's a moment of truth,
Yeah.
right? And it's not suppressed in unrighteousness, in even just a little thing like that.
Yeah, it breaks through.
It reminds me of, I don't know if you saw the article about the little girl in Britain just this last week. She was became pregnant, 11-year-old girl.
Oh, man, no.
She was raped by, it was probably more, by a teen boy that she'd known for a few years. And he's now 14 and she's 11. And anyway, so rape. She was raped.
Statutory rape.
We assume? It's very possible that it was just that. Or, it's unclear the degree of wanted or not wanted.
Not that it matters
It's put
that
in the
much.
category of being raped.
Yeah.
Anyway, she's 11 years old. She's pregnant. The doctors, the Great Britain medical system, and the English medical, is
Socialized
requiring
medicine.
to have her to have an abortion. She says, I don't want to have an abortion. You're too young to decide that. Mom says, I don't want her to have an abortion. You don't get to decide that. We're saying this is what will be. And I thought, you know what? That is suppressing the truth.
Man.
It's not even giving the option to the parent to say, we will take this unfortunate, even grievous responsibility because we value. No, you don't get to. It's raw and naked power is what it is. And it's the same issue, though, suppressing the truth and unrighteousness so that we can continue to be this way.
Okay, but I don't think it's. I mean, I agree. This is a heinous what you're describing, and I'm shocked by it just hearing about it. But I don't think it's power in the sense that if I was in a position of power in Great Britain, I would make that illegal. I want that power to be in place to stop that kind of evil.
You would make what in?
I would make abortion illegal.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
I would make it illegal for any doctor to kill that baby that's inside that girl. Mm-hmm. What's
You're
happening
saying it's
is
not naked
it's
power
the use
for
of power to create evil, to perpetuate evil. It's the evil that we're against.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. But so.
Because power is necessary when the people are corrupt.
But wait a minute. Doesn't this get to? I hear what you're saying. I
Yeah.
agree with what you said. But using what you said at another occasion, I don't remember the Soviet illustration of the one that says, little rub your face into it.
Yeah, right.
Is there any of that in this idea that we're going to make you do something? We know you don't want to do it.
Right.
And the reason we're going to insist upon it is because we can.
The lie is the point.
So there's a little bit more to it than just the doing of the evil. There's the exulting in it because I can.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Which they couldn't do unless they had that raw power.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Man, that's tough.
Yeah.
All right, hey, let's talk a little bit about the Beatitudes.
Okay. Here's what I really thought we had a good discussion last time. In fact, I watched it a second time and thought it was good. Anyway, I had a couple additional thoughts that were somebody else had made, some observations. I thought that's a really good point. Because I think that passage is a difficult passage, right?
Okay.
Turn the other cheek.
Oh, yeah.
Basically. So the observation somebody made, their first thought was, well, Jesus uses hyperbole. That's probably not the best word. He uses shock statements that are excessively strong, oftentimes to make another point.
So we're speaking, for those who didn't listen last episode, we're speaking about the teaching of turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
Don't resist the evil one.
Don't resist the evil one, turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
If they ask you for money, give it to them. If they want to sue you even for your cloak, give them the tunic also. Anyway, all that is a very challenging passage. Well, the quote was, what about Jesus in the same message says, if your right eye sins against you or your right hand, pluck it out or lop it off.
Right.
Well, most commentators, except for Origen, believe that was symbolic and spiritual in nature.
Yeah.
That Jesus's shocking statement was meant to get underneath to a shocking truth, and that it was not meant to be carried out in a literal manner.
Right.
But that doesn't
Hyperbole.
undo. It is something like hyperbole or shock, or it's making a statement that has, its truth is true, but the way it's expressed is a vehicle to get to that truth.
Yeah.
And is that the same thing happening here? And I thought, oh, that's a good point, because that's really clear. I don't believe Jesus meant to pluck out your eye, literally.
Right.
But he's aiming at something that's as pernicious and calls for as aggressive behavior, right?
Does it feel, I mean, when I hear that plucking of the eye and such, I don't immediately, as a young man, I immediately thought, oh, wow, like maybe that's a thing, right? But it doesn't take long to think, nobody does that, right? They just, but it's a slippery slope, right?
That's exactly right.
Because you can start doing the same thing with like
That's
sell
right.
all your possessions.
That's
like,
right.
oh, nobody actually does that.
That's right.
Come on.
And this passage too.
And very quickly, you're just not doing what Jesus says anymore.
Yes.
Right.
So, but nevertheless, Jesus talks in this manner. And it is difficult, but our calling to figure out then how they apply. So I thought that was a good point.
Yeah.
Another one similar to that was the person mentioned, because I threw out the idea, okay, so the doormat. It's inclined to say, well, this is like a doormat approach. Whoever wants something, just give it in to them. And that doesn't seem right. And the guy's point was, what about widows and Paul? Oh, yeah, right. Paul says, look, care for the widows, but not the ones that are younger and can remarry. Because the question is, what's a widow then? Anybody who raises their hand? Paul says, no.
Yeah.
It's not anybody who raises their hand and says, I'm a widow, please care for me. That's not what Jesus is meaning here.
And it's the same with if you don't work, you don't eat.
That's exactly right.
Which is if he's saying someone wants to borrow, let him have it.
Yeah, that's right. So it is not this unqualified approach. And then the last thing I wanted to comment in that regard was the letter that kills. Somebody asked this question, what does it mean when it says the letter kills? And all of a sudden I had this flash. So this is a mea culpa on this.
This is the letter of the law.
Yeah, that phrase, the idea that the letter kills and the
Versus
spirit gives life.
Yeah.
And I realized as soon as this person said it, I thought, oh, the doormat approach that I was feeling the pressure of, that's what it is. It's the letter. What do these words mean in their literal? And I need to, and then
you need to make a checklist to make sure you're a good Christian.
And I didn't even, honestly, here I am, think about things a lot. And this is what I was resorting to. It's a tiny bit embarrassing, but you shouldn't be embarrassed when you make mistakes. It just happens.
Yeah.
But that's where I realized I was making, and that's what the passage would be under the way I was trying to think of it. It kills.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't like the passage. That's why I didn't want to listen to it and try to figure out what it is, because it's like, that can't be, because it only is death. And one of the other comments the guy was, it goes, the law came along from the outside and said, do this. And its intention was to show you couldn't and you need help.
Which is Jesus' teaching is, oh yeah, you thought you could follow the law, let's make it harder.
In a sense, there's
If
a
not
part
impossible,
of that.
right?
Well, and that is a question, is Jesus doing that? You've heard it been said this, but I say to you, and that's one of the questions, if that's what he's meaning. Or is he pointing out the radical nature of, in my kingdom, what was aimed at from the law external to you, and you could only fail at it? In my kingdom, it starts from the inside and goes out.
And it starts to be possible.
It will grow
because
and
the
become
Spirit
a
gives
real
life.
thing.
And that's what it's talking about with the fruit of the Spirit. You don't need law if what's coming out of you is love, joy, peace, patience, etc., right?
Yeah.
Against such things there is no law, meaning the law is no longer necessary.
There is no law. In that regard, the law is not necessary.
That strikes me as similar to, I think it's 1 Corinthians, where he talks about the spiritual man is judged by no one.
Yeah.
Right? You become free.
Yeah.
And he says, I don't even judge myself. I just live with a clear conscience before the Holy Spirit, obeying as he commands.
Yeah.
And doing what he tells me to do.
And in that process of life, you do end up fulfilling the law, but not because you're aiming at the 613 commands.
But it also then becomes, if you're thinking of the Apostle Paul's story, they beat you, they slander you, love flows out of you when you're living that way as a spiritual man.
Yeah.
And you find yourself turning the other cheek without effort.
Yeah.
And then give glory to Christ.
So here's what I'll say, the other mea culpa that I said. I didn't even think about it until just now, but I told it to the guys this morning that I was meeting with. You know what the difficulty is this points to, is that what Jesus is after in his kingdom is love. It is love in the human heart. It was the heart of stone, and it's a heart of flesh now. It had these commandments given to it that were written on tablets of stone, but now they're written on the human heart. Mm-hmm. But that means the whole aim is, Jesus asked, what is the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God and your neighbor as yourself. You know why I have wrestled with the passage, I think, for so long? Is because the love is very small. The component of love is like, you have to admit, like you said, turn the other cheek freely. Well, I cannot really envision a scenario in which I want to turn the other cheek freely.
I have no such desire at this moment.
That's exactly right.
Right.
So there's a problem, right? And there is something to go to God for and say, boy, there's not this love that would flow out easily to the enemy who would persecute me, that I'd want to pray for them.
Right.
Or the man who would slap me repeatedly, seek to take advantage of me, and I'd let him continue. There would be occasions in which I would allow this as a way to love this person.
Right.
I don't find any of those. And it's like, oh.
Right.
Well, okay. Now, the good news is the indictment of law says you're guilty in that. But the failure in the kingdom of heaven is we can go to the king and ask for help.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and I think you're describing a way of reading the teachings of Jesus that does bring life. And I confess I've done exactly what you're describing in my error, which is using Jesus' teaching as another, in fact, higher law, right?
Yep.
But that this higher law is like a higher standard, and now I get to measure even more. Myself and others.
That's right.
And when I measure myself, I come up lacking, so then I find things to conceal. When I measure others, I feel superior, and it relieves me from my own guilt.
That's right.
And I create a destructive cycle.
Yeah.
Whereas if looking at the law, I turn in humility and abandon and say, God, only the fruit of your life in me can create obedience to this law. Its standard is unreachable. That now, reading that law, I can look at my own life and say, wow, this fruit is beginning. I haven't arrived in any sense.
Yeah.
But what a miracle. And then I read the law and worship.
Yeah, that's right.
Instead of
so another
sorrow.
Added to that, what you just said, support for that idea is the passage that's after the one we were looking at, the eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, is when he says, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your neighbor, love your enemy, and pray for those persecuted. So you'll be like your Father in heaven. And he gives a few examples. And one of them is he gives his rain to shine on the just and the unjust, the good and the bad, the not good.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about that is the first passage is somebody's slapping you or they want to steal from you, let them. And then he says, see, you need to be like your Father. And the second passage is he gives rain to everybody. He gives sunshine to everybody. And I was thinking, what if those two work together? Because what the second passage is saying is that God is generous.
Right.
He's generous to those who are his enemies.
Which is the end of that passage. Give to those who want to borrow.
That's right.
Even those who demand.
That is repeated from the earlier one. So what I thought, what I think it's saying is this. What he's after is we being generous people and giving away as a way of living. Now, there's going to come occasion when somebody stands up in your way and they slap you and want to take advantage of you. And there's going to be times to say no. They don't
That's
work,
right.
you don't eat, and there's going to be times to let them take advantage of you. But you don't go out to look for those occasions. What you do is you try to live giving rain and generosity to everybody always.
Well, it reminds me of The Hiding Place, right? Corrie ten Boom and her sister are toward the end of that book.
Oh, yes,
They're
yes, yes,
trapped,
yes.
right? And her sister, in the midst of a concentration camp, is saying, these poor guards, what they must
Yes.
suffer
Yeah.
to do this heinous
Yeah, that's
evil.
right.
That's the love of God. Like,
Yeah, that's
that was
right.
not her.
That's right.
That was the Spirit of God bringing life where there
That's
was
right.
only death.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
that's neat.
Yep. All right. That's all I got. Those are my additional thoughts on that passage.
That's good.
Great passage.
I love to dig deep. All right.
Yeah.
You've been listening to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke. If you enjoyed this episode or found something to talk about, bring it up with a friend and share what we've got. Start a good conversation. And remember, dig a little deeper and think again. We'll see you next time.